All right, Alexander, the gas prices surging in Europe. You sent me a message: $1,800 per 1,000 cubic meters. And what is, I'm looking at a Reuters headline right now, and they're saying that there's now a reverse direction of gas via Germany, via Poland to Germany, and they're saying that that now it's been reversed. A major transit pipeline reverse direction, a move the Kremlin said had no political backdrop. As one Western firm said, Gazprom was meeting its supply obligations. What the Yamal pipeline, I believe, is the pipeline. What is going on here? Okay, gas is skyrocketing. Europe's going to freeze. I mean, that's as clear as day. But now you have this reverse direction thing coming out.
This is complete nonsense. I mean, this is the Kremlin trying to explain away what's happened, because over the last couple of days, what's happened in the European gas market is that the Russians have made it absolutely clear that they're prepared to meet their long-term supply obligations. These are the long-term contracts that Gazprom has negotiated with European consumers, but they are not prepared to provide additional gas for the European spot market. And what has happened as a result of that is that gas flows through the existing pipelines, through the Ukrainian pipeline, and now through the Yamal pipeline, which passes through Belarus and on to Poland. They're either declining or, in the case of the Yamal pipeline, they have been temporarily switched off. Now, in terms of reverse flow, it's absolutely vitally important to say that pipelines are not designed to send gas one way and then the other. That's not how pipelines work. What is happening is that because Russia is not supplying long-term gas, more short-term gas for the European spot market, gas which is intended for Germany is still flowing down that pipeline, but it's going no further than Poland in order to meet Poland's supply side needs, as agreed between Germany and Poland. So in effect, less pipe is coming through that pipeline. That's the important thing to understand. Less gas is being pumped into Europe from Russia this winter. As Russia continues to fulfill, Gazprom continues to fulfill its long-term contracts, but is not providing gas for short-term market interventions in the spot market. And that is causing gas prices across Europe to surge. They are now at record levels, $1,800 per 1,000 cubic meters. That is a crushing situation for the European energy industries and for European consumers when it starts to get passed down. And beyond that, it seems that if you're looking at the reserves, the big reserves that have been created across Europe, reserves that were built by Gazprom with the assistance of European companies and which are located on EU territory, those are very short of gas at the moment. In fact, they're more short of gas than they've been at any time since October. And of course, that's a disastrous situation as we move into winter. So we are looking increasingly at sky-high prices of gas this winter across Europe. And we are also looking at the real prospect, it seems to me, of blackouts across Europe. They're becoming an ever greater possibility.
Except for Serbia and Hungary.
Except for Serbia and Hungary.
Decided to take a long-term approach and
absolutely
sign deals with them.
Exactly. That is exactly correct. I mean, one senses that the energy industry in Europe is in a state of despair. And when they're saying that Gazprom is fulfilling all its obligations, they're talking exactly the truth. That is exactly what they are doing. But they're dropping a very strong hint to European governments and to the EU Commission that they've got to start moving and come to deals with the Russians in order to get Europe through the winter. Trouble is, I don't get the sense that anybody in government, or at least any of the important people in government, are listening. At this moment in time, the EU Commission, the Europeans, are still talking about further sanctions against Russia. And of course, Nord Stream 2 continues to be bogged down in this endless certification process, which is now expected to continue until June. So, I mean, it's a sense, one senses that at some point something's going to happen, you know, sometime around January, February, March, we could start to see real blackouts taking place across Europe, people getting cold. Maybe at that point, European leaders will start to wake up as to the implications of this. But at the moment, virtually nothing's happening. It's just total paralysis. Everybody's still striking poses, talking about disconnecting Russia from SWIFT, that sort of thing, and failing to understand that that kind of talk, that kind of language has consequences, and we see it at the moment.
Why would the EU strike deals in February, even if people are freezing? Even if prices might not go up? It's clear as day that they don't, that the European leaders don't care about the citizens. That's for sure. I mean, I think they've kind of tested that out with the mandates and the KUF and all of these things. So they've come to the conclusion that they can pretty much they can push the citizens to breaking point and get away with it. I mean, they've seen it. They've tested it out now with the mandates. So why wouldn't they test it out with energy policy and say, you know what, ideology trumps the well-being of our citizens, the warmth of our citizens. Ideology trumps the warmth of our citizens.
I think you may be absolutely right, and I think that's quite likely what they will actually do. That rather than retreat on the ideological and rhetorical positions which they've taken, as blackouts loom and energy crisis surge, what they will simply do is blame the Russians. I mean, that could very well be what they will do, and say to the European public, it's not our fault, it's the evil people in Moscow, they're to blame, and as a result, you know, don't blame us, blame them, and we can't back down to this energy blackmail, and we must dig in our heels and go on battling the evil Russian bear. And of course, what that will mean is even less gas being supplied to Europe next year. It will mean higher energy prices for the European economy. It will mean much higher food prices for European consumers. It will mean an inflation crisis, an energy crisis. But one senses that some European leaders, their comfort zone is not worrying about the state of the European economy. It is worrying about the ideology, the rhetoric that they've now become completely, either trapped in or have completely absorbed and are now committed to. So, I mean, it looks increasingly as if that's where we are.
No, I mean, I can see the narrative right now. I mean, it's look, Russia's to blame. Russia's bad. We need to move away from Russia. By the way, we need to go green. So we need to stop with oil and gas and everything else and just start building windmills and everyone drive a Tesla. And, Nord Stream 2 needs to get canceled right away because look at what Russia's doing to us. And everybody, all the EU citizens, you're going to have to sacrifice. It's going to be a hard 5, 6, 7, 8 years. You're going to be eating a lot of bugs because food's going to be very, very expensive. But that's the price we're going to have to pay in order to decouple from Russia's control, in order to move away from Mr. Batty Putin, and in order to finally go green. I mean, that's what they're signaling to everybody, and they don't care. They just don't care. This is they are on an ideological crusade, and you know what? The ends justify the means. If people suffer, if they pay more, if they can't buy food, if they freeze to death, the ends justify the means.
Alex, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm simply saying that that is probably what they're going to do. I mean, there's no sign at the moment that they're prepared to wake up and face up to the realities of what they're doing. Now, whether European businessmen, business people, industrial groups, those sort of people are happy to be hostages on this runaway train, that's another question. What they're going to do in the face of this, what labour unions in places like Germany and Italy and France are going to say in response to all of this. As I said, these are other questions. Maybe the European leaders can simply face that down. Maybe they're confident that the European public will absorb all of this rhetoric. But what it will do, and this is, I think, the long-term thing, is it will weaken ultimately Europe's underlying competitive position. Of course, ideologues don't care about things like that. They probably don't see it. But from a situation where a couple of years ago, Europe was one of the most, along with the United States, the two big economic poles, well, that's not true any longer. And of the three big economic poles, China, Europe and the United States, well, the United States is perhaps not in the greatest shape, but it's still going. It's got vast assets. It seems to me that Europe is about to plunge.
Okay, two questions. Could this be used as an excuse to ramp up conflict with Russia vis-a-vis Ukraine? Do you see a way that they can massage this narrative so that they can continue to push for a war with Russia with regards to Ukraine, at least the war hawks, the neocons in Europe? That's the first question. And the second question is, how much more do you think people in Europe can take?
Well,
do you see any countries that are? I mean, you're in. I mean, okay, London. UK is not in Europe anymore. It's not in the EU. But I mean, you had big protests this weekend. I mean, there were protests all over the place, and now on top of the mandates, they're going to be piling on high energy prices and maybe blackouts and food shortages and inflation on basic foodstuffs. How much more do you think the people of Europe can realistically take before, I mean, they really do start to break and we start seeing some, I don't know, maybe regime changes inside Europe. I don't know. I mean, I'm trying to figure out, they're piling everything on the people now. It seems like they're not doubling down. They're tripling, quadrupling. I mean, it's like, this is such an abusive relationship.
It is. It is becoming increasingly so. Now, let's start with the question of war. I think that in a situation of existing economic crisis in Europe, if you are an ideologue, if you're an ideological hardliner and you can't retreat because that's what the sort of person you are, you don't do the pragmatic thing, which is to come to a deal over Ukraine and other things. You double down on war. Now, from your point of view, even if you lose, and everybody now accepts that if there was a war between Ukraine and Russia, Ukraine would rapidly lose. And I've just been reading, just before we did this program, another analysis of prospects of a war between Ukraine and Russia in, of all places, Radio Liberty. And it too accepted that if there was a war between Ukraine and Russia, Ukraine would be defeated within hours. I mean, it's looking incredibly bleak. But if you do that, if you provoke a war, for example, encourage Ukraine to launch an attack on Donbass or something like that, you provoke a war, the Russians respond. At that point, you impose all the economic sanctions that you can. Of course, they hurt you more than they hurt the Russians. But you can then turn round to the European public and say to them, look, this isn't our fault that you're suffering. It is because we are facing aggression from the Russians in Eastern Europe. And to what extent the European public, which is becoming, I think, increasingly disaffected, is really going to accept that is, of course, another matter. But one could see how a narrative position could be created around it. And then, of course, you can go further still. You can use the fact that you're in a conflict situation with Russia to crack down on people who are saying otherwise, to crack down on those people who are talking against what you say. And we've already seen how the new German government seems to be taking very strong positions against RT Deutsch. And of course, they've now also started a campaign, an across Europe campaign against Telegram. So you can see how that narrative can be created, how it can be exploited in that kind of way. Whether it would work is another matter. Now, I did a program on locals. It's just come out, in which I've looked at the political situation in Britain. And in particular, I did some number crunching, both on popular reaction to the coup and the new restrictions in Britain. And also I did some number crunching about the results of a recent by-election. And they show in both cases growing hostility to, if you like, the narratives that the political class are trying to impose upon the British. And it was fascinating to see how this recent by-election, the one in North Shropshire, the Conservative Party vote imploded. But importantly, so did the vote of the Labour opposition, even though this was a constituency, an electoral district, if you like, in Britain, where normally, if the Conservatives do badly, you would expect Labour to do well. People refused to vote for the Conservatives. They refused to vote for the Labour Party. They went for the traditional default option, which is the Liberal Democrats, which is, to be clear, another establishment party. But I sense that they only did that in that particular very strong pro-Leave, pro-Brexit constituency, because there was no one else. If a party, a new party, were to be organised and run by someone like Nigel Farage, if Nigel Farage were to re-enter politics, judging on what happened in North Shropshire, you could very well see a party like that countering all these narratives that the political class is making in Britain. You could easily see a party like that sweeping the board in places like North Shropshire, which is very typical, by the way, of many Conservative constituencies. So if that's the case in Britain, I've no reason to think that it's radically different elsewhere in Europe. I mean, in France, the situation there is becoming increasingly restive. We see elections in France, always very manipulated elections in France. Macron is struggling. They're building up this new person called Pécresse, who, to be very clear, is as establishment as it gets in France. But then, of course, so was Macron. They're running her again as an outsider. She is whistling all the sovereigntist, nationalist, anti-EU tunes. Nobody who really has studied her career really believes that if she were elected president, that is what she would do. But the very fact that she's had to talk in this way gives you a sense of what the mood in France is. And of course, if there was a real crisis, perhaps people in France who still choose to vote for someone like Pécresse because they like what she's saying, but they don't want to go the full way and vote for someone like Zemmour or Le Pen. Maybe if there was a full-scale crisis, they would change their views and they would actually change their vote and vote for someone like Pécresse, like Le Pen or Zemmour. After all, that was what happened in France in the 50s. I mean, in the 50s in France, General de Gaulle, whose policies were very similar to those of Le Pen and Zemmour, was frozen out of French politics up to the moment when the French political system finally imploded in 1958, and there was no alternative but to turn to him, which is what the French actually did. So maybe we'll get something similar in France. Germany is more complex because, again, you get the sense that there are these parties on the left and especially on the right, Die Linke and especially the AfD, which have been cranked down, but, they could bob upward in the event that there was a deep-seated crisis in Germany. And sections of the German business elite have already dropped hints at various times that if they feel that the mainstream parties in Germany are not willing to listen to them, financial support by them for parties like the AfD, the AfD become a real possibility. So it's possible. I mean, one sensed for a long time that the mood in Europe amongst the European public has been shifting. The difficulty is, it's found it very difficult to find an organized voice.
Yeah. Outside of Germany and France, do you see any other countries where, I mean, this pressure that's being put on the citizens is just going to be too much to bear? I mean, the mandates coupled with the energy prices and inflation, I mean, all of this stuff that's just hitting the people all at once. The complete fault of the European Union.
Absolutely.
The leadership in the EU, completely 100% their fault, and they're doing and they're making. Do you see any other countries?
Yeah.
I mean, it's, a lot of countries. I'm seeing protests, for example, Alexander, people in the streets in Norway, in Sweden, Netherlands, Austria, all over the place.
Yeah.
Any other countries outside of the big two?
I focus on France and Germany because they're the first tier countries, but you see dissatisfaction, you see unrest everywhere now. It's right across the EU. It's true in Spain. We've seen electoral results there. It's true in Italy to some extent, despite the fact that Draghi is holding things together in Italy. It's, of course, if we're talking about Eastern Europe, well, unrest there is much greater. I mean, the Croatian president, for example, has recently been becoming increasingly outspoken. We see, Poland and Hungary, the leaders, the governments, they're still trying to preserve their positions. But though that unrest is becoming widespread, it's not yet either achieved, I think, full critical mass and crystallized into convincing and effective political movements which could challenge the position of the EU centre. And we have seen how ruthless the political centre, the EU, is in maintaining control. We've seen the manoeuvres that have been done in Italy, the manoeuvres that have been done in Austria, the attempts that are now being made in Hungary, the war, the guerrilla war that's been fought against Poland. So we mustn't assume that these people at the centre, even if they're faced with the equivalent of an electoral uprising, are just going to go away and give up. They're going to push back hard, and they still have all the tools of control. So it's difficult to say. Sooner or later, this thing will break down. I mean, of that I am absolutely sure. What I can't be sure is how long it will take, and whether the fact that we're now in the starting position of a looming crisis in Europe in the economy, whether that will be enough to tip things over. It's very difficult to say, but we'll just have to see. I mean, the other thing that we haven't mentioned in this program is that, of course, relations with Russia are now deteriorating, and the point is that the Russians, having completely lost all faith and trust in the EU, are now freezing them out of negotiations. I mean, that's another thing that's going on. The Russians are saying we're no longer willing to even talk to the EU anymore. We really lost confidence in Germany and France too as interlocutors. The only negotiations we're prepared to make are with the United States because it's the only country that has any real agency. And at the same time, the Russians are becoming ever more forceful now in making their demands. And I've discussed at length the kind of treaties that the Russians are proposing, treaties which, to be very clear, the US could accept. I mean, they would be, from a US point of view, I think they would be absolutely the right thing for the US to agree. But for the European leaders, for the ideologues that we are talking about, a US agreement to those kind of treaties would spell disaster. So they will fight them tooth and nail, but they sense, I think, also that the bear is now moving and has finally been aroused. And that's, of course, adding another potent element to this mix.
I wonder, once again, this is going to be the final question.
Yeah.
I wonder if, let's look at the Netherlands. They just imposed a full lockdown. I wonder if and of course, Rutte is an inside guy when it comes to the Brussels globalist Davos club. He's an inside man. I wonder if their calculation is kind of also saying, to an extent, if they're saying, you know what, we're going to enter a very hard winter come, January, February, with gas prices, with inflation. And the best way to get through this is to lock down the population, is to distract, is to create fear and keep everyone off balance. I wonder if there's a little calculus in that as well. I'm not saying it's completely that, but I wonder if they're also thinking, because we're going to be heading into a very tough next January and February, let's just keep people locked up indoors. Let's just, no running around, no going to places, none of that stuff.
Well, of course there is. Absolutely there is. That is exactly. I'm not saying that they all think in that way. I mean, I question whether Ursula von der Leyen, for example, is able to think in that kind of way. I don't think she has that level of sophistication or intelligence, to be frank, to do it. But undoubtedly there are some people who think like this. They're saying to themselves, we're facing an overwhelming challenges in every direction. So we lock down, we close down Telegram, we ban RT Deutsch, we go after all sorts of, we engage in massive campaigns to stop that which we call disinformation. We do all of these things.
Don't drive to work.
Exactly. Don't drive to work. Don't do those sort of things. Don't use public transport. Don't meet in large numbers. Don't do all of those sort of things. So yeah, absolutely, you can see that. But of course, you can go on doing that. But eventually, a tipping point comes. One of two things will happen. Either this will push people to the point where, frankly, they've had enough, and that does happen. I mean, we countries. Societies do reach that point, and at that point, you have an uprising, you have an explosion, you have people coming out on the streets. I'm not suggesting, by the way, a violent uprising or anything like that, but I'm talking about an electoral upsurge which is impossible to control and sweeps everything away. So that's one possibility. The other is that the whole economic, political system in Europe becomes so profoundly demoralized that Europe, the whole EU thing, enters a downward spiral and eventually implodes, bringing down, I must say, large parts of European society and much of the European economy down with it. I mean,
right,
can I just finish with one very simple observation? One of the things that I really bewilders me, and people never make this connection, is look at growth rates, look at economic growth rates. And one of the striking things is that investment and growth rates across Europe fell. When did they start to fall? As these processes of European integration took hold, with the really steep curve coming in after about 2000. It's astonishing to me that people never make that connection, that it is this project which is closing down Europe. It's suffocating Europe. And the extent to which so much of the European public remains in denial about this. When I say the European public, there are people who still believe in this Europe thing. And of course, the European economic and political class, they don't want to see that. That blindness is remarkable. You know, what do they say? Those who are most blind are those who will not see.
Yeah, well, it's decades and decades of propaganda, of EU propaganda.
Well, indeed,
that a lot of
absolutely.
people have been fed. It's going to be very,
Absolutely.
very difficult for them to wake up and understand that this EU thing, simply does not work. At least this iteration.
This iteration, I mean, again, if you go back to the glory days of the European Economic Community in the 1960s, well, that was different. But that was as different from this thing that we have now as chalk is from cheese. I mean, it's just completely not like the same things at all.
Yeah, they just announced that they're putting a 9-month that the EU, every EU member state has to agree to this new travel plan that they're putting together with mandates and passports. They're valid for 9 months, and every country has to sign on to it. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. I mean, it's just it's not working. It's not working.
No, absolutely.
Anyway,
and what if they don't? What if a European country says no? This is. I know exactly, but one does ask oneself what exactly happens then. What if, say, Austria or Poland or Spain, where there's a lot of feelings about this. What if it says no?
Well,
Anyway,
the problem that I have with this is this is not only travel from countries outside the EU into the EU. This is affecting travel within the EU.
Oh, I know.
So, as an EU citizen, you were promised, I could travel from Greece to Spain, and it's like traveling from Florida to Texas. I just get on the plane, I get off the plane. I don't need to show passports. I mean, that was the promise, wasn't it? That was the Schengen promise.
Absolutely.
All of that is out the window now.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's out the window. I need 9-month certificates. Those certificates, every country has to sign up for it. I'm going to get my passport checked. I'm going to get 2 passports checked now, my travel passport and my other passport. I mean, it's all, none of what they promised us holds true. None of it.
Absolutely. I completely agree. I mean, but as I said, still, there is this faith in this God, Europe, this EU God, a God which has failed and which is failing.
And how's it going to affect the tourist industries, for example?
Well,
in the EU countries, in the
that's
southern the southern EU countries, when European citizens are also going to have to think about, well, I'm in Germany and I'm going to spend the summer in Greece, but I'm going to have to get this certificate passport ready.
Absolutely. Well, it's not going to do tourism any good at all. And of course, Greece, it's the country we both know, has been very, very heavily relying upon tourism in order to get its economy moving again. Not much chance of that. Not much chance of that.
Yeah.
That's all they have.
All right, we'll end it there. We covered a lot of different areas. Okay, take care, everybody. The Duran.locals.com, ODYSEE, BitChute, Rumble, and Super U. Look for our videos there, and use the code GOODDAY at the Duran shop. Get 10% off all merch. You have a Good Day mug on you?
Absolutely, of course I do. Always. Now I wouldn't be seen anywhere without them. I even take them when I go to the gym, by the way. So that gives you an idea of how dependent I am on my Good Day mugs.
All right, 10% off when you use that code Good Day at the Duran shop. Take care.